In 2018, Insomniac gave us one of the greatest superhero games of all time with Marvel's Spider-Man. Now 2 years later, Insomniac are back with a smaller title focused on fan favourite character Miles Morales. And unsurprisingly, Insomniac have once again delivered the goods. Spider-Man Miles Morales tells an interesting superhero story, introduces us to a compelling cast of supporting characters, further improves on the already excellent gameplay of Marvel's Spider-Man, and most importantly, brings Miles Morales, one of Marvel's best characters, to life through great writing and a phenomenal performance from Naji Jeter. Spider-Man Miles Morales picks up 1 year after the events of Marvel's Spider-Man, with Miles now being a fully fledged hero in his own right, after spending the last year being trained by Peter. Now Peter has to leave town for a couple of weeks, so when the Tinkerer decides to wage war against the Roxxon Energy Corporation, it's up to Miles to keep New York safe. This entirely new take on the Tinkerer is one of the best parts of Spider-Man Miles Morales. This is the best interpretation of the character that I've ever seen. Her motivations make sense, and I genuinely empathised with her. While you'll probably spot the twist involving the Tinkerer a mile off, they reveal it early enough in the game that it doesn't feel like you're being strung along waiting for a reveal that you know is coming. Roxxon's head of research and development, Simon Krieger, is played brilliantly by Troy Baker. From the second he steps onto the scene, you can't help but be weary of him because of his smarmy demeanour. Spider-Man Miles Morales has so much heart, and this is made crystal clear through its characters. Miles himself is instantly likeable. He's got a ton of personality, he's kind, and he's constantly ready to put himself in harm's way for the sake of others. He embodies everything it means to be a hero. I also really like that Insomniac incorporate Miles' love of music into the game, through the use of both licensed music and the use of Miles' theme, which naturally swells when the action kicks up. There are a couple of musical sequences in the game that clearly draw inspiration from Into the Spider-Verse, and while they don't quite hit the highs of the What's Up Danger sequence from that movie, they still work extremely well within the context of the game and help to establish Miles' unique identity. But it's Miles' relationships with his supporting cast that really make the story resonate, particularly his relationships with his mother Rio and his best friend Genki. There are a couple of other characters throughout the course of the game that play a significant role, but I won't get into them because the less you know going in, the better. Like Marvel's Spider-Man, the story in Spider-Man Miles Morales gets better and better as it goes on, and like the original, it culminates with a fantastic and surprisingly emotional final act. An aspect of this game that really adds a lot of charm is its setting. While a lot of the map is reused from Marvel's Spider-Man, Spider-Man Miles Morales takes place at Christmas, which means New York is filled with decorations and covered with snow, which really goes a long way in differentiating the feel of this game from the original. The festive vibes of Miles Morales also make it feel like a great choice of game to play right now. Of course, we know when it comes to making gameplay feel fluid, Insomniac are among the best in the world. Not only because of Marvel's Spider-Man, but also because of their other titles like Sunset Overdrive and Ratchet & Clank. And Spider-Man Miles Morales is no exception. Web slinging remains the most fun mode of transport I've ever experienced in a game, and the combat has been further expanded and bettered thanks to Miles' unique abilities. As comic fans know, Miles' skill set includes a couple of unique powers that Peter Parker doesn't possess. One being his camouflage ability that allows him to turn invisible, and the other being his Venom Strike, which allows him to discharge blasts of energy from his body. Both of these are implemented into the gameplay of Spider-Man Miles Morales. You can activate Miles' camouflage to gain an extra advantage in stealth sections, or make enemies lose track of Miles when he's spotted, and combining a press of L1 with other buttons allows Miles to use a selection of different Venom attacks that can be effective in both one-on-one fights and for crowd control when you need to buy yourself some time to think about your next move. These new abilities elevate the already great combat mechanics of Marvel's Spider-Man to a new level, and allow Spider-Man Miles Morales to offer an undeniably better and more varied combat system than the original game. Gadgets also make a return in Miles Morales, and while there are fewer gadgets here than in the original game, there's still a fun way to mix up your strategy in combat. I particularly like taking out a handful of enemies at once with a remote mine, and throwing out a couple of holographic clones to distract enemies to give myself a bit more breathing room. You can also further increase Miles' abilities through the skill tree. There are even a few skills locked behind New Game Plus, which gives a little bit more incentive for a second playthrough. One slight nitpick I have with Spider-Man Miles Morales is its puzzles. Most of them simply require you to connect a web between two very obvious points to allow electricity to run through it and power something up. These puzzles are so simple that they really feel like more of a distraction than any kind of challenge. One thing that Spider-Man Miles Morales does better than the original Spider-Man is side missions. Miles has access to an app on his phone that allows citizens in need to request the help of Spider-Man. These missions offer a good amount of variety, with Miles taking on tasks ranging from rescuing a victim who's been kidnapped to helping find a missing cat. These missions help ground Miles and let you see Miles interacting with the community he's protecting in a way that no other superhero game does. Miles Morales also features one of the best assortments of collectibles I've ever seen. Many of them give additional context to the story and world of the game. This makes collectibles feel rewarding to find and makes seeking them out feel like it enriches the experience rather than feeling like busy work you're just doing for the sake of a trophy. The types of collectibles themselves are also varied, and some of them are pretty unique. For example, one type of collectible are sound bites. These task you with going to an area, listening to a snippet of audio, then figuring out what produced the sound and scanning a new sample of said audio. Those who played Marvel's Spider-Man will remember listening to J. Jonah Jameson's podcast while swinging around New York. Podcasts return in Miles Morales, and while J. Jonah Jameson is still there and as amusing as ever, there's also a podcast by Danica Hart that Miles listens to while exploring. Danica Hart is a fairly new character in the comics, only being introduced in the last 5 years. In the comics, Danica is a YouTuber, so it makes sense to implement her as a podcaster in the game. It's also cool to see Insomniac drawing inspiration from all sorts of time periods of Spider-Man comics with their choice of characters. Podcasts are a great way to help with world building in the game without slowing down the pace of the gameplay. It's definitely a concept I'd like to see more games explore. While Miles Morales is a smaller experience than 2018's Spider-Man, there was more meat on the bone here than I was expecting. It took me around 15 hours to 100% Miles Morales and about 20 hours to get the platinum. This is a substantial game in its own right that packs the big set pieces, thrilling boss fights, and level of production value that you'd expect from a Spider-Man game. Spider-Man Miles Morales also looks gorgeous on the PS5. Particle effects and use of colour both really pop, and the character models look great, with so much detail packed into each of the 19 unlockable suits in the game. Like many recent games, Miles Morales offers a choice between a fidelity mode that prioritizes visuals and allows ray tracing, and a performance mode that lets the game run at 60 frames per second. I briefly tried the fidelity mode, but after experiencing how silky smooth the game feels at 60 frames, I found it impossible to go back. Miles Morales also serves as a pretty good showcase of just how fast the PS5's SSD is. When you fast travel, we're talking about literally 2 seconds to get to a new location. Boasting a compelling superhero story, an excellent leading performance, and smart improvements to the already near perfect gameplay of Marvel's Spider-Man, Spider-Man Miles Morales is a worthy successor to its stellar predecessor and one hell of a launch title for the PS5. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe for more reviews, including my upcoming review for Sackboy: A Big Adventure.